So actually, speaking of policy, are you? This is something I've been meaning to ask, but there's a meme called the Ro Khanna cycle. Are you familiar
Yeah,
with this
of course
meme?
I'm familiar with it.
Okay, what
You
do
think
you
politicians don't know their own memes?
do? You see the memes that people post about
I,
you online?
I've seen the Ro Khanna cycle meme.
Okay, so what do you think about that?
I think it's fine. I think look, people in politics. I'm not. Uh, I have ideas that are new and complex. I support innovation. I support entrepreneurship. I support technology. I support wealth generation. But I believe that wealth should be taxed and that we should have progressive policies of Medicare for all and free college. And so some people are like, well, how can he support policies of innovation and entrepreneurship but also be a progressive? And it's because I have this vision that you have to have both wealth generation and progressive policy. I am someone who believes deeply in human rights and believe deeply in standing up for human rights because of my grandfather, who spent 4 years in jail and part of Gandhi's independence movement. And yet I have a very hopeful and aspirational vision for America, that we can get there, and a pragmatic vision of how we get there. And so some people say, okay, are these contradictory? But I think people who are at the edge of interesting contradictions are helping shape new ideas. It doesn't mean they're always right, but I embrace that.
Okay, let me ask you something about the wealth tax. I agree with you, and I do think that there's nothing inherently wrong with wealth generation. I guess like there's something a little bit wrong with the way that people generate wealth in terms of the extraction of surplus labor value, but we don't even need to get into that. What I want to ask specifically is the idea that people claim that a wealth tax is completely impossible. What do you say to those people?
Just not true. I mean, if you tax, well, first of all, why not try it to say it before you say it's impossible? What's going to happen?
Maybe we do
90,
already try it.
90,
Property taxes, right?
yeah, exactly. And 93% of wealth is in America. So what are they going to do? Are they going to take their money and put it in China? Come on, they're not going to take their money and put it in India. They're going to pay the tax. And what are they going to buy? All artwork? I mean, no, they're not. They're still going to have a lot of things in assets and property and cars and stocks. And yeah, there's going to be some amount that you won't be able to tax, but that's an administrative problem that can be fixed, and you're going to be able to generate a fair amount of revenue based on that. You should also have a tax on financial transactions, of stock transactions, that a lot of other countries do. You should have a step up in basis. When you want to give your money to your kids or your grandkids, they should have to pay for the appreciation that's happened in your stock. Right now, you can buy a stock at $100, it goes to $1,000. You give it to your kids, and they don't have to pay that entire capital appreciation. So there are things we can do that allow people to build wealth, but then tax it so that everyone has health care, child care. You know what the biggest challenge, Hassan, in my view, in this country right now is people who are drowning in debt. You talk to 20 and 30-year-olds. They're drowning in debt because of education, because they, like me, I took out $80,000, $90,000 of loans, but became like $160,000 because of all the interest. Like you kept having to pile it on. They're drowning in debt because of educational loans. They're drowning in debt because of credit card, and it's charging 30% interest. And they're drowning in debt sometimes because of medical bills. That's crazy when you have my district producing more wealth in one zip code than has ever been produced in the history of humanity.
Speaking of your district, actually, what do you think is going on with the tech bro mentality that I feel like for a long time, a lot of the tech evangelists were firmly committed, it seems, to the Democratic Party. And I feel as though there's a little bit of a change. You got the All In podcast, those guys, and many of these like entrepreneurs who are now finding themselves in the throes of the Republican Party more and more. Do you have an opinion on that? Do you know why that's happening? I personally think, not a big fan of a lot of the tech giants in general. I assumed that they were always Republican, and now they're more open about it. But you know, was there a genuine ideological shift in Silicon Valley in your assessment?
There has been a slight shift. I mean, 2/3 of people are still supporting the Democrats, but it used to probably be 4/5. So there has been some movement, and the people who are not supporting Democrats are louder. There are a number of reasons. One is something where I think the party should correct. I think we've been unnecessarily hostile to Bitcoin and some of the digital assets, and we can debate whether they have innovation in financial instruments, but at the very least, they're a currency that a lot of people around the world use. They're people who use it in authoritarian nations, who use it in nations with inflation, and we shouldn't be as negative on it. So that's created some negative vibes, and those folks tend to be loud. Then there are folks who are younger in Silicon Valley, many of the PayPal guys, and they don't believe in the state having a positive role. And I think that's just
I think they don't believe in the state, period.
yeah, and that's just a misunderstanding of history. Because Tesla was funded by Obama. SpaceX was supported by Ash Carter. The Silicon Valley came into existence because of Kennedy's call to go to the moon and NASA buying semiconductors. So there's a misunderstanding of history and the role that the state has played in allowing for innovation, and we've got to do a better job in making that case.
Yeah, what do you actually? Let's talk about Elon Musk. What do you think about him being? I mean, in virtually every industry, Tesla was not only. It's not just SpaceX, which is an offshoot of NASA. It's like a privatization initiative that normally was handled by the state originally, right? So it takes a lot of government subsidies. I would say that I guess. What's Elon Musk's internet service? Starlink, which now he also has Star Shield, I guess, which is like the more defense contractor side. That's again defense contracting, so that's still state subsidies in that regard. But more importantly, Tesla's green energy initiatives, or not Tesla's green energy initiatives, but as you mentioned, Obama's green energy initiatives and like credit swaps kept Tesla afloat at a time when he was damn near bankruptcy, which maybe we should have let him be bankrupt, but. And now he's out here talking about how the government is overspending, that the government is spending far too much money, using this like ridiculous reactionary right wing and somewhat populist sentiment to try to engage with the average person as though he is not taken in billions of dollars and have generated this immense wealth as a direct consequence of government subsidies. Why do you think that? Why do you think he's made this dramatic shift to the right?
Well, I'm going to recommend that he comes on your podcast.
His baby mama was on my podcast back in the day, Grimes. We keep in touch sometimes, but I don't think he's too fond of me.
Well, I think you guys. I think if he believes in speech, you should have a conversation.
I don't think he believes in speech.
You know, but I think that would be fascinating. It would get a lot of attention. But look, I think that I made this case directly to him. I know him. I've gone on his spaces or Twitter spaces, and I've said that the role of the state is critical to the economic engines in your companies, but also in Silicon Valley in general. And look, is there waste and duplication in government? Of course there is. And you can talk about having more efficiency in government while recognizing the role of government. But we've got to persuade people like Elon. He had voted for Obama twice, and I think that we can still make the case to people about why the Democratic Party in government is better for innovation, for job creation, and maybe some of them are going to be lost, but I'm hopeful that others will see the light.
Do you feel like it's too much short-term thinking, like immediate profits, trying to max out the earnings every quarter instead of like having like a bold agenda for the future that requires maybe a little bit of government funded research and larger government initiatives overall?
I certainly think that short-termism has taken place in this country, which is why we've had the hollowing out of research and development budgets. We've had the hollowing out of investment in the country, and the government can take more long-term bets on things like the mRNA vaccine, on things like GPS, on things like the internet. There's a reason that those were funded by the government, because they weren't subject to short-term quarterly profits. And what has made America work in the past has been the combination of the two. The government funding fundamental research, fundamental science, the government funding the scaling of key industries and communities, and the private sector also innovating to commercialize, because you don't want a Soviet-like war economy where everything is being done by the government and you don't have any consumer goods. So it's the combination that has made America work.
Okay. Agree to disagree on certain aspects of that, but let's switch gears a little bit and talk about, I guess, war instead of the war economy. There is, it seems, especially in my generation, a genuine disconnect with the way that voters feel about American foreign policy and the way that politicians react to American foreign policy. I wanted to ask you a little bit about, obviously there's protests happening outside. of the DNC in terms of demanding a ceasefire in Gaza. Why do you think there is such a disconnect?
One, I think there isn't a full understanding of the history of the region. You know, as someone who has studied British colonialism because of my grandfather, I mean, British colonized India, they colonized Ireland, they got rid of all the textile industry in India and Ireland, and after the Ottoman Empire, they established a colonial rule over large parts of the Middle East, including Egypt and including what is now Palestine. And the Balfour Declaration was the original sin there, where yes, we had Jewish self-determination, which I believe in Jewish homeland, but the Palestinians were only given civil and religious rights. They weren't given political self-determination. And that was a British problem. And then from 1936 to 1939, the British, through armed violence, suppressed a lot of the Palestinian self-determination. And I just think that that history isn't fully known or taught in America. And what I believe is that we need to recognize Palestinian self-determination for a Palestinian state and recognize Jewish self-determination and the right of Israel to exist as a secure nation. And if you come with that framework, which I believe is rooted in justice, then you say, okay, we look at this conflict, and Netanyahu, we can't just continue to have a blank check to Netanyahu, and he is not coming to the table on peace. We need to put pressure on Hamas, and we are putting pressure and should put pressure and condemn their atrocity on October 7th. But we also need to put pressure on Netanyahu. And instead, what is happening is usually our administration goes there, and then we basically provide cover for Netanyahu adding terms, and we say that he's accepted it, and Hamas doesn't, and nothing, and people keep dying.
So that you actually brought up a really interesting point, because this has just happened. There was Axios reporting that just came out that Anthony Blinken, in the latest round of talks, again did the same exact thing that you just mentioned, which is to claim that Hamas actually is sullying the terms and conditions of the deal, a ceasefire proposal that America had proposed that said it was Israel's own proposal, where obviously Israel killed the principal negotiator on the Palestinian side a couple weeks prior to that. And Anthony Blinken just yesterday said, oh no, Benjamin Netanyahu agreed to the deals of this proposal. And then it came out during this, like literally in the past 24 hours, that no, Benjamin Netanyahu had not agreed to the terms and conditions of the proposal once again. I personally fear, I do not want another Trump presidency. And I personally fear that, electorally speaking, obviously I think it's unconscionable. I consider what Israel is doing to be a genocide. I'm very open about that. I consider Israel, alongside all of these human rights groups, from Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and Israeli human rights groups like B'Tselem, to be an apartheid state even when it's not conducting offensive operations in Gaza. Having said that, however, beyond all of that, I think that there's the morality of the situation, which I think is unconscionable, but then there's also the electoral consequences of leaving someone like Benjamin Netanyahu, who is right-wing, who is very right-wing, who is aligned with Donald Trump. There's other reporting coming out now that he might even have private conversations, private correspondences about the ceasefire negotiation with Donald Trump directly. Leaving that out on the table without, while we have an election coming up, is, I think, leaving too many cards on the table for a foreign actor to potentially end up changing the trajectory of the American election in a pretty significant way. Do you feel like the Democrats are seeing that as a reasonable threat in terms of like what Benjamin Netanyahu might be able to do that would potentially lead America into war as well, into this conflict directly? Do you feel like within the caucuses there is like a genuine perceived threat of such a reality?
Well, I agree with you on the danger of Netanyahu. I would use different language in characterizing Israel. I mean, what I believe is that Israel is illegally occupying the West Bank in Gaza, and that that occupation is illegal. But I've been to Israel. I think Israel should exist as a secure state, and that Israel is an ally, but we should be against the occupation. We should be for a two-state solution, and we should recognize a Palestinian state and be one of the 143 countries around the world that does that, which in itself would be a bold policy. So while I don't use some of the language you do, I just a disagreement. I am quite progressive on the issue, and I was one of 37 Democrats who voted against a blank check and giving offensive aid to Netanyahu because of the concerns of human rights. And I have no love for Hamas. I think they have been engaged in brutal terrorism, but I don't think that the solution is militarily possible if eradication of Hamas, what Netanyahu is trying to do, is not achievable.
A reality that Defense Minister Yoav Gallant also has admitted, recognized. It's seemingly only Benjamin Netanyahu, Itamar Ben-Gvir, and Bezalel Smotrich that are refusing to recognize that reality, that Hamas is not a military solution, but it's a political one.
What we should have done is listen to our allies, the Gulf allies, the Saudis, Jordan, Egypt, and participated in a summit on the future of Palestine and brought in Palestinian civil society, brought in Israel, Egypt, and say, how do we work towards a two-state solution that is an alternative to the governance structure of Hamas? But the first thing we need to do is bring an end to the war. And what Netanyahu's condition that he wanted, which is to have a continued presence of Israeli troops on the border of Egypt, that's not just opposed by Hamas, that's also opposed by Egypt. And so my view is that we need to pressure Hamas through diplomacy in Qatar, through diplomacy with Egypt, through outreach and clarity with Iran to make sure that Hamas is releasing the hostages. But we also need to put some pressure on Netanyahu, because otherwise Netanyahu can continue to defy the United States. If there's not a ceasefire, and if Iran engages in any kind of retaliation for the assassination of Hamas's political leader, then you'll risk the start of a broader war in the Middle East, and that's a big risk to world peace and
with the potential of American troops also being deployed in the region with carriers all surrounding the Arabian Peninsula at this moment.
Exactly, and Lindsey Graham's already cheerleading for a war in Iran, and Netanyahu would want nothing more than to drag us into a war against Hezbollah and Iran, which I vehemently oppose. So I think that this is a time, Mehdi Hasan has written about it, that we need a pivot from Vice President Harris. I'm glad that they're engaging, but we need a pivot like Hubert Humphrey had in the Vietnam War. The problem is Humphrey did it in October, and if Humphrey had done it in September, he may have won. But Vice President Harris should give a speech. Here is how my vision is going to differ on the Middle East. And that speech should be about not just a permanent ceasefire and a release of hostages, but making it clear that we're going to uphold the Leahy law, that the State Department is going to uphold international law, and that Netanyahu's not going to get a blank check, and that Netanyahu has really defied the administration, and that we're going to hold both sides accountable for ending the violence that is making Israel less secure, that is making the hostage families less secure.
Yeah, no, that's great. Do you feel like there is a real hurdle in terms of what Kamala Harris can say versus what kind of pressure she could potentially apply internally, as she is still currently a part of the Biden administration as the vice president?
I think the biggest way to get a shift is to make a speech about it, or to do an interview with you. I mean,
no, I agree.
And then that she is the nominee. She has extraordinary power now. In the administration, I think that would push the administration in the right direction. And so that is what I have said publicly. That is what I've said privately. And I say that not just because it's about an election. It's about human lives. I've got people in my district who have had 16, 17 people and their families killed in Gaza. I've also had people who had family or friends killed on the October 7th attack. And what I want is for this violence to end. And what I want is for a shift in foreign policy. Anyone who thinks that this foreign policy of ours has been successful when we've had a war for 11 months, 40,000 people dying, is just wrong. There's no historian who's going to think, yeah, that was great policy. It's obviously been a failure.
Yeah.
We have to wrap on this space because it's reserved at
Okay.
7:15. But if you
Okay, we can do that. You want to walk and talk?
Walk and talk works.
All right, let's do it. This space is cool. So what do you do for fun?
I spend time with my kids.
Do you work out?
I swim, and I go on walks. That's my form of workout. But I don't go. I used to when I was younger go hit the gym, but that has.
You're kind of tall. You don't ball?
Huh?
You don't ball?
I used to. I don't.
I don't know where we're going. This way? We're gonna go this way.
Do you work out? You look like you work out.
I work out a little bit. Excuse me. Which way are we going? Down? Who's your favorite Republican congressperson?
I like Mike Gallagher. He just left Congress.
Okay, is this a safe pick? Someone who just retired?
I'm trying to think of someone who's there right now. Brian Fitzpatrick is a good guy.
This way.
He represents my hometown of Bucks County. I've done a lot of builds with him. Those are two at the top of my head. I work a lot with Todd Young. He's a senator from Indiana. We've done bills on chips and signs.
Who's your favorite Democrat? Who's your favorite Democratic congressperson?
Oh, Jamie Raskin. He's really thoughtful.
Okay.
He's cerebral. He understands a lot of history.
I feel like a lot of people like him.
Yeah.
He's a nice guy.
Who's your favorite, other than me?
I don't know. Who's my favorite? It's hard. Maybe. I really like Ilhan Omar. I like Rashida Tlaib. I like AOC. I like the whole squad. Yeah. Bernie, of course, as well.
Where are you? Are you all in on Harris, or are you waiting and seeing, or where are you?
I'm waiting and seeing. I would say that, is there a quieter area that we can go to specifically, like maybe not as cluttered? Because we're right in the gate. Oh, you have to leave?
In like 5 minutes.
No, it's all good. If you guys gotta go, it's fine. Yeah, that might be a little bit better.
So you want to just do it in the lobby?
Yeah, the elevator lobby might be better, yeah. You asked how I feel about Harris. Am I like fully in the tank? No, I would like to, I think that the Democratic Party, I'm very critical of the Democratic Party at times. And I think that they've done a bunch of things that are very, very different than how the Democratic Party normally operates. I feel like one of the biggest issues that I have is that they run scared. Like the Dems, oftentimes they run scared. They're very afraid of being called a radical. They're very afraid of progressive policies, or like signing their name on progressive policies. And I think when Republicans run the narrative of crime hysteria, when they run the narrative of immigration panic, I think that's pretty successful. And Democrats don't usually counter narrative against that. And then, of course, you leave a lot of falsehoods on the table when you don't counter message against that. And then all of a sudden, polls reflect that reality. And Dems love focus testing.
How would you counter message on crime and immigration?
Easy. Look at the data. Crime is at an all-time low. The minor blip that happened in crime mostly focused on homicides, and it was a one-off. It, of course, immediately went away. Now it's down 40% in places like Philadelphia. So, and even at that time, people were, that's a fact. Use facts to address the made-up hysteria from Republicans. These are falsehoods. They're running on complete falsehoods. They're running on emotional anecdotes. And obviously, when you see a lot of homelessness, you think, oh, that's crime. That's a criminal. Like immediately, that's how people personalize the crime that they're experiencing. When in fact, like there is no organized retail theft. the notion that local news and national networks were running on organized retail theft while showing National Retailers Association numbers on shrink, when shrink was only going up, adjusted to more foot traffic, more people going out and shopping, was ridiculous. That was something that they could have easily addressed, and instead they did not do that. And I would say we, during the red wave that didn't really happen, but it turned into a red puddle. I think like in places like New York, Democrats leaning on that crime narrative and that crime hysteria actually led to worse results for the Democratic Party in comparison to other places.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, like outside, like right here?
Yeah, and they'll let us right now.
Okay, yeah. And I think that at the time I was, my uncle, I know, you know him,
Yeah,
Cenk.
Cenk, yeah.
So he got swept away by the crime narratives. Like he became pretty, in my opinion, reactionary. We debate all the time about this stuff, especially on Thanksgiving. I call it Thanksgiving. He comes over, we debate on issues that we disagree on. And at the time I kept trying to be like, no, look at the data, like you're wrong. There is no like organized retail theft happening. There's no like progressive DAs that are, letting criminals off the hook or anything like that. And I think Larry Krasner, all things considered, not being kicked out, even though they undemocratically tried to push him out in Philadelphia, and then the murder rate going down, homicide rates going down in Philadelphia is a perfect response. And a perfect example.
I think doing your homework and knowing your facts. I think
That's what I want. I want Democrats to just like
just
address
like immigrants
the truth.
don't commit more crimes than those who are native born.
Thank you. Exactly. The idea that like immigrants are doing unimaginable crimes on a regular basis. Donald Trump says at his rallies that hundreds of thousands of Americans are being murdered by immigrants every year. That is an abject lie. The actual data shows that it's 23 homicides per year that undocumented migrants commit.
Is that the case?
23.
Yeah.
In the fiscal year 2024 so far, 23 homicides have been committed by undocumented migrants. How insane. And then he tries to pair that up by saying, and Republicans do this all the time, fast and loose with data. They play fast and loose all the time. They say, oh, what about the fentanyl deaths? 90% of the drugs that are crossing the southern border, or just all of American borders, are apprehended at regular points of entry. That's the Department of Homeland Security's own data, right? That's border apprehensions, right? They're not actually coming in the pockets of like otherwise law-abiding abuelas.
What about the other 10% though?
Yeah, okay, that's a great concept, but like that's not how you write policy, right? Yeah. It's like saying, okay, 23 too many murders, right? Like you could say that, but ultimately there's 10,000 plus homicides happening in this country. Like it would be like your house is on fire and you're worried about the color of the curtains. You know what I mean? Like it's a minor aspect of a major problem. So it's just pure Republican hysteria, hyper-focusing on migrants, and then lying about this situation by hyper-focusing on these anecdotes that are not,
What's your
resembling
hope that the
reality.
progressives are going to emerge as a big force in the next 10 years in American politics?
I don't know if the progressives will emerge as a big force in the next 10 years in American politics. I have no idea.
You got to keep growing. You'll get a big platform.
I think overall, I try to do what I can. I care a lot about, labor unions. I care about building different forms of organizing to ensure that even if the Democratic Party is not always going to have your best interests in mind, you can at least force them. You can create like additional pressure valves to ensure that they do things, because ultimately this is a democracy and people do have to, like our elected representatives have to respond to the pressure.
But we have progressives who are pushing for policies on a living wage, Medicare for all, free college, getting people out of debt, the medical debt, the student debt, the credit card debt, and more importantly on a just foreign policy, which I think we will move towards. I mean, more and more, 37 of us voted against the offensive weapons to Netanyahu. There's a greater understanding that we've got to have a move towards peace and not overseas wars, and that Iraq was a colossal mistake, and that we don't want to get into a war with Iran.
I know, but I think ultimately American foreign policy is too deeply tied to the defense contractors. So in that regard, it's very difficult. I feel like there's always bipartisanship. There's always bipartisan consensus on American foreign policy. I don't know. I just don't think that Americans also, by and large, care about foreign policy all too much. Even with respect to Israel and Palestine, it's at the forefront of a lot of people's minds. But ultimately they won't make. I think the Democratic Party and the Republicans both rely on people not making an electoral calculation on that, on a foreign policy. But as you mentioned with LBJ, foreign policy is not usually top of mind until it becomes the only thing that people care about. And I think leaving so much of this conversation in the hands of Netanyahu with the bear hug strategy is a genuinely, like, I can't comprehend it. Like, I think it's a genuinely scary prospect.
Yeah.
Both a scary prospect from, the continuation of Israel's offensive siege in Gaza, which is, completely unacceptable, but also genuinely scary because there is a capacity to open up a multiple front war here, and that would require American troops.
Well, that's what needs to be avoided, and that's why we need a pivot.
Yeah.
And, but I think that progressives like me calling for that and voting that way and trying to shift the policy, and I'm hopeful that the Vice President will do it. I think it'll be helpful for her in reestablishing trust with the hundreds of thousands of voters she'll need, not just in Michigan, but in a lot of these battleground states.
Yeah, we'll see. I hope. I mean, I'm waiting to see something from the Harris ticket that shows that. But I think that a deviation on foreign policy requires genuine ideological commitment, an ideological commitment to peace.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I think that like Kamala Harris wants to win, and I like that. I think that's good. I hope that they make that calculation and choose to do the right thing in that regard. But I think people want assurances,
I understand that. There are too many people who have died. And for me, it's personal, given my grandfather's history with colonialism, that we have a just recognition of the Palestinian self-determination in addition to a secure Israel. And I look forward to continuing this conversation in the months and years ahead, because I think you're a very important progressive voice, even where we don't see always eye to eye, and you may not always agree with me. I think that we've got to have more open conversation, honest conversation, and we've got to move this country in a direction that recognizes that so many people have been left out economically and that has a more just foreign policy.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
All right.
Thank you.
Don't forget, let me get that off you.
Yes.
So
I found the video where I accosted Gates, and you were right there.
Oh, good.
all right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.